Hi, I hope you all had a wonderful, merry Yom Kippur. Um, I decided I had to make this video in response to a question I asked. I realized it needed clarification. I asked on my Facebook feed if about non-Jews who kept the Mitzvoth, and I had an exchange with someone that kind of stung. They were like, "Oh no, we keep Yom Kippur on the right day, on the correct day." And there's actually an explicit Gemara in the Talmud about this, where there's a dispute between Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Yoshua, where Rabbi Yoshua, who was a massive scholar and was an expert in the calendar, and he said one day was going to be Yom Kippur, and the Sanhedrin, under the leadership of Rabban Gamliel, said, no, it's going to be a different day. And so Rabban Gamliel said to Rabbi Yoshua, he said, I want you to come and appear before the Sanhedrin with your wallet and your walking stick, which would have been desecrating Yom Kippur, on the day that you say is Yom Kippur. And that was in order to show that Rabban Gamliel, that he acknowledged that Rabban Gamliel was the real authority. And Rabbi Yoshua did that. And the reason why he actually did that is in the Torah we talk about, when we say Kiddush, we talk about Shabbat being Moedei Hashem. Hashem established Shabbat. The Moedei Hashem means the times of Hashem. But when we talk about the holidays, it's Moedenu, our times. Now, why is that? L'chaim, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol niyeh bidvaro. Because Hashem established Shabbat by creating the world. And on the seventh day, he rested. But we establish the holidays by declaring the new moon, declaring the months. And that's done by the Sanhedrin. So there's an explicit section in the Talmud where they say, no, you can't just say, this is my Yom Kippur. It's Am Yisrael's Yom Kippur. Other religions, it's like, I have faith. That's not Judaism. Judaism is if you are part of the nation of Israel. And there's another interesting sugya which I think is relevant, another interesting section of the Talmud, where there's it's what they call Tanor Shalachnai, a snake oven. And the question is, an oven, can it receive ritual impurity? And of course it can if it's made out of clay. But they had this way of making rings of earthenware with sand, wet sand in between to kind of stick it together. And that made an oven that did not receive ritual impurity. And the whole sugya goes on and says, one rabbi said, no, doesn't receive ritual impurity. And the Sanhedrin said, no, you know something? If we say it doesn't receive ritual impurity, what's going to happen is people are going to mess with the laws of impurity and everything will become pure when it's not. So we want to make like a fence and make sure people don't mess with it. So we're going to say this is impure. And the one rabbi said, well, if I'm right, may the river run backwards, and the river ran backwards. If I'm right, can the tree fall down, and the tree fell down. If I'm right, may the walls of the Beit HaMidrash, of the study hall, fall over, and they started to fall over, and the rabbi said, no. And then the man said, okay, if I'm right, may a voice come from heaven and say I'm right. And what happened was a voice came from heaven and said, he's right. And the rabbi said, no. The earth, the heavens belong to Hashem, and the earth he gave to people. So we decide. And a voice came from heaven and said, Nitzchuni banai, my children have overcome me. So there's a side to say, and also there's a Pasuk in the Torah, there's a verse in the Torah, which I can't remember at this very moment, which says that we should listen to rabbis. So there's no such thing as I decided. Even if I learn a certain section, and I learned, for example, I have this belief that we shouldn't be fasting on Tisha B'Av anymore. Do I fast on Tisha B'Av? Yes, I do, because I'm part of the nation of Israel. All that being said, when I first started writing for Israel 365, what was then Breaking Israel News, I was fascinated by this phenomenon of Christians keeping Passover. That was the first story I wrote. David Nekrubin walked me through it. And first of all, I want to emphasize, non-Jews are not required to keep the biblical commandments. They're absolutely not required. The Jews took an oath at Mount Sinai to keep the Torah. The non-Jews were not there. That being said, a lot of Jews get very upset when non-Jews keep the Torah commandments. They say it's a form of appropriation, and I understand that feeling. But and there are some mitzvahs that especially sting. But according to halacha, Jewish law, even people who are not required are permitted. It's not true for all of the mitzvahs, but it is true for almost all of the mitzvahs. The non-Jews are permitted. There are those who say, oh, they can only keep the 7 Noachide laws. First of all, it's inaccurate. They can keep all of them, or almost all of them, if they want, with a few notable exceptions. And just like women can keep all of the mitzvahs, women can put on tefillin even though they're not required, but men are required. That being said, when I first started looking into non-Jews keeping Passover, I was very excited until I saw this one thing, that Christians, when they keep the Passover, they say, oh, the Paschal lamb, the Passover offering, is a sin offering, and that's Jesus. And I said, it's not a sin offering. It is a thanksgiving offering. If you're going to do the mitzvahs, please do them right. Otherwise, what you're doing is idolatrous. You're using the Torah to perform idolatry. If you want to say Jesus is my thanksgiving offering, and he's my way of approaching the God of Israel with thanksgiving, that's a different thing. But to say that the mitzvah in the Torah of bringing the Passover offering is a sin offering is rewriting the Torah. Now that's getting close to where my issue lies. Someone told me, oh, we keep Yom Kippur on the right day. No, you don't. You don't. Why? Because Israel establishes that. It is our duty to establish the calendar, even if it seems wrong by what you see in the heavens, by what you see in the moon. It has to be fixed. I firmly believe that one of the first things the Sanhedrin will have to do is to fix the calendar, to readjust it through the sighting of the new moon. And if you're going to do it by the new moon, it's not just saying, oh, I think it's a certain day. You have to bring witnesses who saw the new moon the month before in Elul, who come on Rosh Chodesh Elul and say, we saw the new moon. Witnesses who stand before a Beit Din, who stand before a rabbinic tribunal. Okay? And that has to be done through a rabbinic tribunal, a Sanhedrin of 71 sages and elders. Okay? That being said, I still love it, and I don't, even I have, like, for example, my dear friend Tommy Washburn. I remember the first time I connected with him, he's like, Tommy lives way out in the middle of nowhere. He does things his way. I remember one of the first times I saw him was he showed his son had just shot his first buck. And I asked him, I said, Tommy, you eat kosher. So what did you do? You have to slaughter it. And he said, that's what he does. Right after he shoots it, he slaughters it. And no, it's not kosher, and no, I wouldn't eat it. But I understood that Tommy was finding his way to Hashem. And I found that in so many ways that he does. Like, for example, we're coming up on Sukkot. I've seen people, they make a sukkah so many different ways. I remember there was a guy, he made a mezuzah. He took his laser printer, printed up the Shema, and posted it like a poster on the front of his door. And he said, this is my mezuzah. And no, it's not according to Jewish law. There's a very fine line that I might not be able to tell the difference. And the fine line is, are you coming to replace Israel? Are you moving towards something? Or are you just moving away and doing your own thing? Because that's replacement theology. I'd like to have a bigger discussion about why Christians don't trust the 4,000 years of tradition that Jews have faithfully kept. It's been built into the church to mistrust the Jew, to not trust the Jew. They demonized the Talmud, which I can't understand. Kabbalah is not a horrible thing. I recommend seeing my interview with Rav Eyal Reis of the Rabbi Eyal Reis. I'm sorry, I always mispronounce his name, of the Tzfat Kabbalah Center. The Zohar is actually a commentary on the Torah, which a lot of people think until they get into it, they don't realize that's what it is. So I think the bigger discussion is that replacement theology is so built into the church that Christians have been indoctrinated not to accept anything from Judaism. Okay, I don't want to convert you to Judaism. That's actually also against Judaism. I'm not allowed to preach to you, and there are people there are Jews who will tell me that I'm doing something wrong by teaching you the right way, the rabbinic way. But the point is, there's a lot of stuff there that might help you. Okay, when you go to build your sukkah, take a look at what we do, our traditions. You know, I've had people tell me, "Oh no, the Hebrew Bible, Jesus was around before the Hebrew Bible," and it's like insane how built it in is to reject everything Jewish. The Talmud goes back, it was written down at one point, but the tradition goes back way before that. It's an oral tradition that was finally written down. The oral tradition, according to our tradition, goes back to Mount Sinai. And even if a rabbi can be pinned down to a certain period of time, he's not just spouting what he thinks. He's giving over a tradition that he received that was an oral tradition, a living chain. I don't understand how you can learn the Old Testament, the Bible, the Torah, without Rashi. Without Rashi. And Rashi was a medieval wine merchant in France. But what he actually is doing is he's giving over a tradition that dates way back before him. If we want to fix, what's the word I always use? If we want to have a coming together, you have to trust us. You can't just say, "Oh, that's what the Jews do." It's not relevant. We do what we do, and we have a long, long tradition of doing it. And if you learn the sources, we also have a tradition of at Mount Sinai, the Jews said Na'aseh v'nishma. That's in the Bible, word for word. Na'aseh v'nishma. We will do and then we will hear, meaning we will do and then we will understand. Why? Because if you only did what you understood, you'd never get around to doing it because there's so much to learn. So, for example, tzitzit. I can recognize the Christians, they're the ones with the tzitzit that are clipped onto their belt. Don't understand why they do that. It's on a four-cornered garment. It should be on the garment. Why would you recreate a calendar to be totally out of sync with the nation of Israel? We received the Torah not as individuals, but as a nation. Judaism is a nation. It's not a personal faith. So, I'd like to recommend that Christians start to trust Jews. Trust that we know what we're talking about. And it's actually, once you start that, there can be an amazing dialogue. A dialogue that opens up all kinds of windows into the Bible, into God's revealed word. But if you just say, "Oh, this is what I think. This is how I read the Bible," you're missing out an awful lot. There's a lot of... Okay, let me also add, from our side, we have to acknowledge that it's valid. We have to say, there's a tendency among Jews to say, they don't keep the commandments, they don't keep the mitzvahs. Well, they're not supposed to. But there's a difference between not doing the commandments and just totally ignoring how they're supposed to be done according to Jewish tradition. I mean, there is some wiggle room. I remember when I was interviewing Rav Shaul Magid about Jesus and his approach to doing mitzvot. I remember there's the story of Jesus going through the field of wheat on Shabbat. And he said, and Jesus, he told his followers they could pluck the wheat, which no Torah observant Jew would do today because you're not allowed to harvest on Shabbat. But Jesus ruled that you can break the Shabbat in order to save a life. And being hungry while you're out walking outside of town is a life-threatening situation, so you can pluck the wheat. So Jesus ruled, you can pluck the wheat. And I said, but that's not halacha as we know it. And Rav Shaul Magid said something very interesting. He said Jesus existed before we have what we call the Shulchan Aruch, which is the collection of rabbinic literature that tells us how we should do the halacha. And there's some, variations within it depending on different sources. Jesus predated the Rambam, Maimonides, who wrote the Yad Chazakah, the Mishnah Torah, which is also a compilation of how to do the commandments. And he said Jesus existed before all that. What was halacha back then? Today, you want to know the halacha. Pardon me. You go to the Shulchan Aruch. If you ask a rabbi, he's going to the Shulchan Aruch. And the Rambam. And there's a lot of other halachic sources. But what was halacha in the days of Jesus? Halacha was what your town did, what your neighborhood did. There was no single source for halacha. It was still an oral tradition. And if your tradition if your town had a tradition, or if your rabbi had a tradition, or if your family had a tradition that you plucked wheat on Shabbat, that's what you did. So there is wiggle room, but you have to do that from a place of knowledge. You can't just say, I throw it all away and I'll do what I want. That's not Torah. Certainly not connecting to Torah. That brings me to another thing. There are a few things that I noticed. Okay, it's interesting when it comes to eating biblical. It's really funny. Eating biblical is not being kosher. If you eat biblical, I could not eat at your house. And the reason being, I've noticed that people who eat biblical, they stop eating all the creepy crawlies and pig, and they start eating only animals that are categorized as kosher by the Bible. I believe they usually do kosher slaughtering, and that's a great thing. But they don't do the milk and meat thing. And that's very interesting. And yeah. And also Shabbat is an interesting thing. I'd like to highly recommend connecting with David Nekrutman. David Nekrutman is on a big campaign to have Christians keep the positive commandments of Shabbat. I was very zoche. I was hugely blessed to connect with Rabbi Yoel Schwartz of blessed memory, a massive scholar, a massive tzaddik. And he also said that non-Jews should keep the positive commandments of Shabbat because they're connected to the creation of the world, which is all of us. Okay. All that being said, there's an expression that touched me deeply when I first started being religious. I was living in Jerusalem, and I was trying to find my way, and I used to ride my bicycle down to this beautiful chassid, this beautiful Haredi guy, young man, who lived in Meir Sharim. He was like, real Haredi. And I would ride my bicycle down, and I was clearly, I'd maybe remember to put on my kippah before I sat down to learn with him. And one day he said to me, many ships cross the ocean, but they can't follow each other. Each one has to find its own way because there are no roads and they don't leave trails. And what does that mean? We're each trying to find our way to Hashem. So I really praise anyone who's working to find Hashem. And I've encountered so many people who they're not Jewish, they're not trying to be Jewish, and they only accept what they want. That's great. If you want to keep, Shabbat in your way, if you want to keep eating biblical your way, amazing. It's a stunning sign of the times that we're freight train headed towards Geulah, towards redemption. All of us together. But given the long history of replacement theology, where the church just took the Jewish Bible, translated it incorrectly, inaccurately, and then started dictating to us what it said, given that they demonized rabbis, demonized rabbinic literature, given that they've twisted things. I mean, if you go into the Vatican, I remember once I was up on Mount Arbel, and I saw a group of Christians at the top, and they were touring with their pastor, and they sat down in the middle of a field, and he took out this little thin cloth, and he took out a cup of wine and wafers. And I was thinking to myself, well, it's kind of weird to put on a fringeless talit, a fringeless talis, and to do kiddush in the middle of a field in the middle of a week. That's not what he was doing, of course. If you go into the Vatican, they have incense, They have the temple vestments. The Vatican was made to be a replacement for the Jewish temple. I have this theory that they cannot coexist. You can't have both the Jewish temple and the Vatican existing at the same time. The Vatican was intended to replace the Jewish temple in Jerusalem. There are a lot of correlations in the actual structure and the way it runs. The fact that the priests cannot marry is based on the fact that the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, before Yom Kippur, has to separate from his wife for concerns of purity, of ritual purity. So there's been so much replacement theology. I beg of you. I'm not telling you to do it the Jewish way. But what I'm saying is there's an awful lot to learn there. There's an awful lot to learn in the rabbinic literature. If you start learning the Bible with Rashi, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. If you start seeing how deep the rabbinic literature goes into the commandments and how to do them. They ask questions no one would ever think to ask. And they get the answers that you would never find yourself. I'm an iconoclast. I love to throw rocks at the experts and at the authorities. I was in yeshiva for 10 years throwing rocks at the rabbis and at the authorities and at the rabbinic literature. And the rocks kept bouncing back at me. They've got it together. It's very solid. I highly recommend it. And even if you've come to a different conclusion, given this poisonous history, this disgusting, destructive, murderous history, this anti-Bible, anti-God replacement theology, I beg of you, say, this is my pathway to God. I'm never going to say that the Jews are wrong about their pathway to God. I literally had someone tell me, oh, you're doing Yom Kippur on the wrong day. I'm like, no, I'm not. The nation of Israel is doing Yom Kippur on a specific day. It's not the day I chose to do Yom Kippur. It is Israel's Yom Kippur. You have a different Yom Kippur? Fine. But don't tell me I'm doing it on the wrong day. And that's about all I want to say about that. Y'all be blessed. If you have any questions, please feel free. Contact me on Facebook. Ask the questions. I might know some of the answers. I'm not totally stupid. Thank you all. Be blessed. Have a wonderful day. Excuse the way I look. I'm having a rough morning after Yom Kippur.